All right, second episode ever of Star Trek Voyager. Let's see if they can follow up on that excellent series premiere. I've got a real good feeling about this show. That's a little play I wrote about 14-year-old me sitting down to watch this episode for the first time. I call it naivete, from the French, meaning naivete. This is a review of the Star Trek Voyager episode Parallax. If you have not seen this episode and you don't want to know what happens in it, be warned, spoilers beyond this point. There's a proverb that tells us if you travel far enough, you will eventually meet yourself. For the crew of the Starship Voyager, that happens pretty much right away, and then a few more times as the years go on. But you've got to figure they are traveling pretty fast, so... At the end of the first episode of the series, the two crews, Janeway's Starfleet crew and Chakotay's band of Maquis, decided to join forces aboard Voyager. How's that going? Well, B'Elanna just punched Lieutenant Carey in the face. They quarreled over how to technobabble some technobabble. Understandable, but hey, also unacceptable. B'Elanna has been confined to her quarters. Tuvok wants to bring her up on charges, but Chakotay tells Tuvok to take the stick with the Starfleet flag on the end of it out of his ass and let him handle it. To be clear, the stick with the flag on it is in Tuvok's ass. On his way to visit B'Elanna, a couple of his former Maquis gang come up to Chakotay like, are these Starfleet assholes really gonna screw B'Elanna over this? Are you gonna do a mutiny? Because we're 100% behind you if you want to do a mutiny. Just say the word and we'll start killing. Chakotay's like, I don't ever want to hear you talk that way again. Now, I'm going to keep this between us because I know you'd never actually betray the crew and try to take over the ship, especially you, Seska. B'Elanna is pacing like a caged animal in her quarters. When Chakotay arrives, she demands to know how much longer the captain is going to keep her confined. And Chakotay says, rest of the trip, 75 years. B'Elanna tells Chakotay that she's never liked his twisted sense of humor, and Chakotay is like, don't worry about it, after this episode pretty much my entire personality disappears. The Voyager crew is still in a period of adjustment following the events of the pilot episode where they were stranded in an unexplored region of the galaxy, tens of thousands of light years from home. One of the decisions Captain Janeway has to make is who's going to be chief engineer. The senior officer in the engineering department is Carey, the dude whose face B'Elanna broke, but Chakotay thinks that should be B'Elanna's job. He brings it up to Janeway during a staff meeting, but Janeway blows him off. The ship is rocked by a series of sudden impacts, and everyone runs onto the bridge to see what's going on. There's a big old space thing that suddenly appeared in front of them. Janeway takes a look at it and says, I know what this is. It's a Type 4 space thing. Tuvok reports a distress call coming from the space thing. There's another ship trapped in it. The distress call is garbled and impossible to make out, and the other ship can't be seen clearly because of all the interference. Chakotay calls B'Elanna in engineering to see if she has any suggestions for how to get the ship out of there, and she has an idea for how to modify their tractor beam. Janeway steps in like, sounds good, Mr. Carey, you take charge. And then she pulls Chakotay into the ready room and says, look, it's really important that this crew be unified and work together, but that will never happen until your good-for-nothing Maquis scumbags learn their places. Chakotay says, what about people like B'Elanna, who obviously have the ability to be leaders in this crew? Janeway counters asking, how can I ask Starfleet officers on this ship who actually graduated from the Academy and earned their spots to take orders from a former member of the Maquis just because circumstances demand it? Because circumstances demand it? Meanwhile, in sickbay, Kes discovers that the doctor is mysteriously shrinking. That's not a joke subplot from that found Star Trek episode's Twitter account. It's actually in the show. The tractor beam plan fails to rescue the other ship, so Janeway orders Paris to set course for a nearby star system Neelix mentioned, where there are some friendly aliens who might be able to help them out. On the way, Janeway calls B'Elanna to the ready room for a personal chat. She says to B'Elanna, do you think you're suited to being chief engineer, or are you too much of a hothead? And B'Elanna's like, I should kill you for even asking me that. B'Elanna tells Janeway, look, I don't care what other people think of me. I'm not a fan of Starfleet or its rules, so if you think I'm not right for the chief engineer job, hey, it is what it is. I'm not gonna fucking beg for it. B'Elanna leaves. The doctor calls from sickbay to report that members of the crew are coming in with headaches and dizziness and also to complain about his continued shrinking. Janeway thinks those problems, including the doctor's malfunction, might be related to the space thing. The doctor's like, "What space thing?" "That space thing! It's back!" Even though they've supposedly been flying away from it all this time, the space thing is suddenly back in front of them. They have another meeting to try and figure out what the hell's going on, and B'Elanna suggests another technobabble thing they can try, which might allow them to communicate with that other ship, the one that was already trapped in the space thing that sent the distress call. Maybe the other ship knows more about what's going on, and they can work together to free themselves. So they all go to the bridge, and they do B'Elanna's technobabble thing, and it works, and... get ready for a shock now, because what I'm about to tell you, there's no way you could have ever seen this coming. That other ship in the space thing? Boom! Look familiar? Paris goes, "It's us! It's the Voyager!" It's just Voyager. We don't use the definite article when referring to the ship by name. Since when? Since right now. I'm starting it, and it's going to be a thing. So the other ship is Voyager itself, and the distress call was actually Janeway's initial hail of what they thought was another ship, but was actually themselves. They convene another staff meeting, and B'Elanna explains, using the metaphor of a person trapped at the bottom of a frozen pond, looking up toward the surface and seeing a reflection of themselves, but thinking they're seeing another person at the bottom of another pond looking back at them. Paris is confused. He's like, "So, wait, wouldn't the person at the bottom of the pond be drowning? Why are they just calmly looking up at the ice?" You're getting distracted by the metaphor. That's not important. The point is, the other ship is us, the space thing is causing time distortions, and we've been trapped inside of it this whole time. Okay, then I have another question. The only reason we got close enough to get trapped in the space thing in the first place was because of the distress call. But the distress call was just us hailing ourselves. But how could we have received a message from ourselves that we hadn't sent yet, and that we wouldn't have sent if we hadn't received the message from ourselves that we wouldn't have sent if we hadn't received the message from ourselves that we wouldn't have sent? Somebody help me! I think I'm going insane! No, it's okay. It's a time shenanigans episode, not a crew member goes bonkers episode. Using the power of science like a couple of nerdy girl bosses, B'Elanna and Janeway figure out that the only way for them to escape the space thing is to find the opening they made on the way in. So they do another technobabble thing to locate the crack in the space thing, but it's begun to seal itself and is now too small for Voyager to fit through. So Janeway and B'Elanna take a shuttlecraft so they can get closer to the crack and do another technobabble thing to make it wider so the ship can use it to escape. But, oh no! When they return to Voyager, they find two Voyagers. One is the real thing, the other is a reflection caused by the space thing. They're running out of time to get out before that crack closes up again, so they have to pick one. They argue about it for a second, but then Janeway's like, "The real ship is the one on the right. Notice the position of the one on the left. It's doing what we were doing 20 minutes ago, which means it's a time-delayed reflection." Also, if you look closely at the one on the left, you'll see the name on the hull reads The Voyager, and our ship is just Voyager, no definite article. Sounds good to me. Hey, where do you fall on the whole Batman or the Batman thing? I prefer the Batman. It makes him sound stranger and more enigmatic. What do you think of people who say the Spider-Man? I think they should be institutionalized. Anyway, Janeway's correct. It's the ship on the right. She and B'Elanna get back to the ship, they escape the space thing, and because B'Elanna has proven herself and bonded with Janeway over the fact that they're both huge science dorks, B'Elanna gets the job as chief engineer. Yay! Oh yeah, the doctor is still tiny. The end! I know it's always hard to tell from my half-assed, paraphrased plot summary what my actual opinion is, so let me tell you flat out that I do like this episode. It's not a great episode, but it is a very good second episode, and in hindsight, a frustrating one. Frustrating not because of anything in the episode itself, but because of the course the series started to take from this point on. Here, in its second episode, Voyager still reflects the promise it showed in its premiere. Look at all the potentially interesting story threads that are either introduced here or carried on from the pilot. There's tension between the Maquis and Starfleet factions of the crew. Tension that can lead to violence. B'Elanna punched Carey. Tension that can lead to fractures in the fragile alliance between the two factions. One incident and Maquis crew members are coming to Chakotay to say, hey, if the shit goes down, we've got your back, boss. There's tension between Chakotay and Janeway. He tells her, I'm not here to be a token Maquis. I understand that this needs to be one united crew, but no one else is going to look out for my people, so I will. And I'm going to fight for them to be treated with respect and do what they know how to do and not just keep their heads down and their mouths shut and follow orders from your Starfleet people. Chakotay himself is a nexus of tension. He argues with Janeway, he argues with Tuvok, he argues with B'Elanna. He's caught in the middle, pushing Janeway to treat the Maquis fairly, but also having to convince the Maquis to get with the program and at least be willing to cooperate with the Starfleet faction of the crew. He sticks to his guns, showing up Janeway in front of the rest of the crew, albeit in a small way, by violating protocol to call B'Elanna in engineering instead of Carey, the senior officer. And he does have a sense of humor. His answer to B'Elanna's question of how long she's confined to her quarters, rest of the trip, 75 years, is really funny. Aside from character interactions, we see the crew beginning to deal with the reality of their situation. In the first staff meeting, they talk about ways they can conserve their resources, cut their power usage. I still think there's no point shutting down the holodecks because they use different power sources, so we can still do holodeck episodes thing is a cheap cop-out and, in retrospect, an early warning sign that the creative team of the show wasn't actually going to commit to their premise. But as far as this episode goes, at least we see the crew having to acknowledge limitations and grapple with what to do about them. Then comes the end of the episode, where B'Elanna gets the promotion to chief engineer, shakes hands with Carey, says please when ordering her Starfleet subordinates to do something, and that's it, I guess. Problem solved. Tension released. Same thing with Janeway and Chakotay. They're buddies at the end. Conflict? What conflict? And as the series goes on, Chakotay himself will devolve very quickly from the guy with the hardest job on the ship, the guy with the wit and tenacity to hold the Starfleet and Maquis factions of the crew together, into perhaps the most nondescript regular character there has ever been on a Star Trek show. I said it already, it's frustrating. As far as the episode itself, Parallax is solid. I do think the big reveal that the other ship they're trying to rescue is Voyager and the distress call is their own message being reflected back at them is pretty predictable, but that might be because I've watched too much Star Trek. And that is a very Star Trek twist. There's a lot of technobabble, which will also become a big problem for the series going forward, but the essential dilemma and their strategy for escaping it are both explained in ways that make it easy to understand. Sure, the explain the sci-fi problem using a metaphor bit is a well-worn trope, but it's much more dramatically effective than having characters spout endless lines of meaningless technical jargon before announcing they've solved the problem. They're trapped someplace, seeing a delayed reflection of themselves, and the only way out is to find the way they came in. Okay, I get that. I also appreciate the last-minute additional turn they throw in when Janeway and B'Elanna are returning in the shuttle and find two identical Voyagers waiting for them. They disagree over which one is the real one. Both of their arguments sound reasonable, but Janeway's winning argument makes sense and connects logically to the dilemma. As, by the way, does the wacky subplot with the incredible shrinking doctor. Yes, it's comic relief. Yes, it does feel a bit tonally awkward compared to the rest of the episode, but B'Elanna's theory of what's causing the doctor to shrink leads her to an idea for how to communicate with the other ship in the space thing, which then leads to their discovery that the other ship is actually them, which leads to them finally figuring out the true nature of their predicament. It's a good episode. It's smartly structured, well-paced, makes excellent use of the ensemble, has some strong character beats for Janeway, Chakotay, B'Elanna, M the Doctor, and picks up where the pilot episode left off in laying the groundwork for a compelling series about a group of people with limited resources in unfamiliar territory, forced to depend on each other for their survival, facing outside threats and internal conflict all along the way. Unfortunately, instead of that show, the producers decided to make Star Trek Voyager. Those are my thoughts on Parallax. What do you think of this episode? Please share your thoughts with me in the comments. If you'd like to support this channel, and I sure wish you would, if you can afford it, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or by making a one-time gift by clicking the thanks button, or via PayPal or Venmo. Links are in the description. Next week, this batch of Star Trek bottle show reviews concludes with a look at an episode of Star Trek Enterprise, Shuttle Pod 1. See you then. Thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.